In April 2000, 22-year-old Russian diving instructor Yuri Lipsky descended into the infamous Blue Hole in Dahab, Egypt, along the coast of the Red Sea. He had his diving camera running, intending to capture the stunning underwater topography of the site. What he ended up filming, however, was a harrowing first-person documentation of his own final moments in one of the ocean's most unforgiving and deadly locations. Yuri was not an amateur. He was an experienced diving instructor who understood the ocean and knew the theoretical risks of deep water exploration. But the Blue Hole is notorious for creating a false sense of security, having already claimed the lives of over 200 divers. On that fateful day, a cascade of compounding errors would tragically add Yuri's name to the memorial plaques that line the nearby cliffs. The dive began deceptively calm, but Yuri soon descended past standard recreational limits, dropping deeper into the abyss. As he sank further, the immense water pressure began enacting a physical toll on his body and his equipment, a process that would ultimately seal his fate. In diving, managing buoyancy is a constant balancing act. At the surface, a diver's wetsuit contains thousands of tiny nitrogen bubbles that help them float, but as a diver goes deeper, the crushing weight of the water compresses these bubbles, reducing their volume. If a diver fails to add air to their buoyancy compensator device, BCD, to counteract this, they lose their neutral buoyancy. The water aggressively compresses them, inducing a state of negative buoyancy, a runaway accelerating sink that is nearly impossible to arrest once it gains too much momentum. At roughly 90 meters down, Yuri checked his dive computer and depth gauge. What happened next was captured clearly on camera, painting a chilling picture of panic in the abyss. The audio recorded by his camera picked up the frantic, labored sounds of his breathing. Soon, those breaths turned into muffled screams echoing through his regulator, revealing the sheer, terrifying moment when he finally understood the gravity of what was happening to him. He kept sinking, plunging past 100 meters and then past 115 meters, completely unable to stop his rapid descent as his body and gear became denser and heavier under the unfathomable pressure. The BCD vest, which was designed to save his life in a situation exactly like this, required active inflation to work. But something critical prevented him from utilizing it. At depths exceeding 40 meters, divers breathing compressed air begin to suffer from a condition known as nitrogen narcosis. Often compared to severe alcohol intoxication, this condition severely clouds judgment, impairs motor functions, and triggers intense confusion or panic. Coupled with the sheer physical pressure compressing everything around him, the life-saving equipment that could have easily brought him back to the surface became entirely useless in his hands. His camera continued to record relentlessly as he violently hit the ocean floor at 115 meters, documenting a terrifying reality that no diver had ever captured on film before. The resulting footage shows a chaotic, dizzying swirl of sand and the exact, heartbreaking moment he realizes he is going to die down there, completely alone in the crushing, suffocating darkness, sinking faster with absolutely no way to stop. The Dahab Blue Hole simply does not forgive mistakes, and Yuri's camera forever captured the true horror of falling into the abyss, knowing with absolute certainty that you are never coming back up. In May 2018, a diver visiting the pristine, tropical waters of Fiji was enjoying a beautiful, relaxing dive. He was completely captivated by the vibrant, colorful reef fish darting around the coral and had his camera out, actively filming the macro marine life. Scuba diving, especially when operating a camera, can often lead to a phenomenon known as task loading. The diver became so hyper-focused on framing his shots of the smaller fish that he developed tunnel vision, rendering him entirely unaware of his broader surroundings. He had absolutely no idea that something massive, silent, and incredibly lethal was moving through the water column directly behind him. A 5-meter-long tiger shark, an apex predator known for its aggressive nature and incredible stealth, was swimming straight at him. Tiger sharks are notoriously curious and opportunistic hunters, often utilizing ambush tactics by approaching their prey from behind. The diver was completely oblivious, continuing to film the tiny reef fish as the massive predator closed the distance, its massive jaws beginning to open as it zeroed in on the back of his head. Fortunately, scuba divers are taught to always dive in pairs, and this incident proves exactly why. His dive partner, who was positioned slightly further back and surveying the wider environment, saw the massive shadow emerging from the blue. What happened next came down to absolute split-second timing. Knowing that shouting is impossible underwater, the partner lunged forward with his metal shark pole. He thrust the rigid stick outward with all his strength, making direct contact with the shark's snout just as its rows of serrated teeth were about to close completely around his partner's head. The physical strike to its highly sensitive snout startled the tiger shark, causing it to divert its path at the absolute last possible moment. It turned away gracefully into the deep blue, mere inches from ending the beautiful dive in a gruesome tragedy. The diver only survived that day because his partner was actively watching the water for the silent, deadly dangers that swim where you simply cannot see them coming. In March 2022, a highly trained commercial diver was engaged in an extremely dangerous job at a staggering depth of 220 meters below the surface. At this depth, the environment is utterly alien. It is a world of crushing pressure, near-freezing temperatures, and absolute pitch-black darkness, where only highly specialized saturation divers venture to work on underwater infrastructure. While he was working in the gloom, illuminated only by the artificial glow of his high-powered diving lights, a massive swordfish came out of nowhere and attacked him with terrifying, unprovoked precision. The massive fish charged out of the darkness at incredible speed, its long, bony bill slamming straight into the diver's heavy equipment backpack like a dart forcefully hitting a corkboard. It was a direct, violent hit that, had it been aimed just a few inches differently, could have easily pierced straight through his life support equipment, severed his air supply lines, or impaled his body, resulting in almost instant death at that depth. Instead, the force of the impact was so severe that the swordfish became completely stuck, its bill wedged deeply into the thick, rigid material of his gear. The diver was left in a terrifying predicament. He had absolutely no choice but to initiate the long, arduous ascent back toward the surface with a massive, thrashing predatory fish physically attached to his back. At 220 meters deep, over 700 feet below the surface, a diver cannot simply swim to the top. Ascending from a saturation dive requires entering a pressurized diving bell and undergoing days of gradual decompression to prevent the nitrogen dissolved in their blood from bubbling and causing fatal decompression sickness. So, what made that swordfish target the diver with such explosive force? And how did it even see him in the pitch-black water at a depth where few things should even be moving? Marine biologists suspect that the reflection of the diver's artificial work lights on his metallic gear may have mimicked the flashing scales of prey, or that the fish was startled and reacted defensively. Regardless of the reason, it resulted in one of the most bizarre and terrifying deep-sea encounters ever recorded. On August 27, 2015, just off the coast of Cape Town, South Africa, a group of experienced divers set out for an excursion at Skipkop Reef. The team consisted of 3 divers, Francois Smuts, Renee Nell, and Eric Fury. The waters around South Africa are globally renowned for being the prime hunting grounds of the great white shark, meaning any dive in the region carries an inherent, underlying tension. On this particular day, the surface conditions seemed ideal, calm seas with only a gentle, rolling swell. However, beneath the surface, the water was murky, heavily saturated with particulates that drastically reduced visibility. Despite the poor, greenish gloom, the divers decided to drop down and check whether the site was safe and diveable. One of the divers descended slowly through the water column, reaching a depth of roughly 62 feet. Because of the terrible visibility, he had to constantly scan his immediate surroundings, peering through the underwater fog. As he turned his head to check his blind spot, his blood ran cold. He found himself face to face with a massive great white shark, hovering in the water less than 3 feet away from him. It had approached completely silently. He reacted with pure instinct, thrusting his spear gun forward and jabbing the massive predator in the nose to create distance. The shark flinched and pulled back into the murky gloom, but the relief was short-lived. Moments later, the massive silhouette materialized from the green water again. It turned around, lowered its pectoral fins, a universal, highly aggressive posturing among sharks, signaling an imminent attack, and charged straight at him. The diver braced himself and fended the apex predator off for a second time, striking it with the blunt end of his spear gun. The shark thrashed and disappeared into the fog once more. Knowing he had pushed his luck as far as it would go, the diver immediately initiated an emergency ascent, his adrenaline surging and his air supply rapidly running low.
White! Pas op voor die white!
When he finally broke the surface, gasping for air, he looked down and realized a diver's worst nightmare. The great white had actually followed him upward through the water column. This is an extremely rare and highly predatory behavior, indicating the shark was actively stalking him to the surface rather than just defending its territory. Panicking, he immediately began shouting at the top of his lungs to warn the others still in the water. Eric surfaced shortly after and, realizing the danger, quickly scrambled up the ladder and safely onto the boat. Francois, however, was still somewhere underwater, completely isolated in the murky depths. The seconds ticked by in agonizing suspense as the crew watched the water, expecting the worst. Then, suddenly, Francois casually broke the surface, entirely unharmed and completely oblivious to the chaotic life-or-death struggle that had just unfolded right above him. Later, once safely on the deck, he mentioned that he had heard some strange, unidentifiable thrashing noises nearby in the water, which he later realized was the sound of the shark attacking his partner. The deeply shaken team decided to pull anchor and leave the area immediately, relocating to a spot roughly 8 miles away. While the diving continued that afternoon, the atmosphere on the boat remained incredibly tense for the rest of the day. It was an encounter none of them would ever forget, and a stark reminder of how quickly a routine dive can come dangerously close to ending in irreversible tragedy.